Trump's support among Republicans across virtually any issue is often in the like 80s or 90s, maybe like 70s on some issues, but 44%, that's a real low number in terms of his approval rating from Republicans on his handling of the Epstein case. So I think that's why the White House and Trump needed to nip this in the bud.
The US House has voted overwhelmingly, hasn't it, to release all files on Jeffrey Epstein held by the Justice Department. The votes were 427 to 1. The bill will now have to pass a Senate vote before President Donald Trump would sign it into law. He was asked about the release of the Epstein files, wasn't he, during his meeting with Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Here's his response.
Why wait for Congress to release the Epstein files? Why not just do it now?
You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely. You're all psyched up. Somebody psychs you over at ABC. They're going to psych. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter.
Oh, my goodness, Sabrina, somebody there from ABC getting the Donald Trump treatment. He was not happy about the question being asked. And yet Donald Trump has said that these files should be released now, hasn't he?
He has, and it's a stark reversal from the efforts that President Trump has made both publicly and privately to prevent the release of these files. And that was also flip-flopping from what he campaigned on. He had campaigned last year in the election on releasing the files because there's a widespread belief among his own party and his own supporters that there are people in positions of power who had close associations with Epstein and have not been outed and not been brought to justice. So I think what actually happened here is that Trump was really just staring down the barrel at mass defections among Republicans in Congress who said that they were going to vote to release the files. It was looking like it would have been a veto-proof majority. So to avoid that embarrassment, he's now at least given his blessing. But his behavior certainly has invited a lot of scrutiny for a story that they would much rather put behind them.
Absolutely. What happens next then? It's gone through Congress. It passes to the Senate. Will the Senate pass this bill, do you think? Well,
I think that because the vote was so overwhelming and Republicans are under a lot of pressure here, I expect that they will. I mean, they have to decide if they want to hold this vote. That's up to Republican leadership. The president says he'll sign it. I think now that his position has changed, it makes it a little bit easier. And you know, it's something that MAGA Republicans have been clamoring for. I mean, Democrats, of course, have been eager to get these files because they want to see if there are any vulnerabilities for President Trump, who did have a friendship in the past with Epstein. Trump has not been accused of any wrongdoing tied to Epstein, but Democrats want to see if there's anything there. And Republicans, they believe there's some kind of client list, and it may include prominent Democrats. So there's just been so much political pressure around this issue that it's hard to imagine, especially after such a decisive vote today in the House, that the Senate wouldn't take it up and send it to President Trump's desk.
And of course, there has been that high-profile breakdown in communications, if I can put it like that, between Donald Trump and the Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, formerly a great supporter of his, who spoke about the rift that's being created within the MAGA base due to the Epstein files.
I wasn't a Johnny-come-lately to the MAGA train. I was day one 2015, and there's a big difference in those Americans and those that decided to support President Trump later on. And I'll tell you right now, this has been one of the most destructive things to MAGA. Watching this actually turn into a fight has ripped MAGA apart. And the only thing that will speak to the powerful, courageous women behind me is when action is actually taken to release these files, and the American people won't tolerate any other bull. That's where we are today.
Well, we know what she thinks of him, and he has made it quite clear what he thinks of her. Where does it go from here? Do you think there is real damage done to the MAGA supporters that have been staunch supporters of the president so far?
I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is sort of an exception to the rule with respect to the MAGA supporters. If we're talking in a more general sense, it's not entirely clear what's motivating her decision to break with Trump on a host of issues. Some people wonder if she has broader political ambitions of her own. But what we do know is that there was a Reuters poll just out the other day showing that only 20% of Americans, including just 44% of Republicans, which is low for Republicans, approve of how Trump has handled the Epstein case. Normally, Trump's support among Republicans across virtually any issue is often in the 80s or 90s, maybe 70s on some issues, but 44%, that's a real low number in terms of his approval rating from Republicans on his handling of the Epstein case. So I think that's why the White House and Trump needed to nip this in the bud. I don't think that there's a broader MAGA rift at play unless Trump, despite the vote, tries to block the release of the files and drags this fight out any longer. I mean, the whole thing here is the cover up worse than the crime? That's sort of been the big question mark. If there's nothing incriminating about him in these files, then there's no real need to block them or try to prevent them from being released. And I think the sooner that they're released, the sooner that the MAGA coalition will likely move on. And Trump can also try and reset and focus on the issues that the White House would rather they focus on.
We were just pondering a little bit earlier, though, whether could it be possible that there might be national security implications if the totality of these files are released?
Well, I mean, it depends obviously on what is in them, and there's been so many questions about whether there's incriminating information that could be used as blackmail by foreign governments against anyone who may be mentioned within them. Are there other secrets that could jeopardize people's standing around the world? I mean, I think it's something that the American public certainly feels very strongly that there should be much more transparency around. And the White House has not actually made the national security argument themselves. It's just Trump has just called it a witch hunt or a hoax, as he has with any other investigations that have in the past either been that he's been implicated in or that he's been connected to in some way. So the administration is not even making a strong national security argument. It seems more like they just did not want this to be embarrassing for Trump, given he is mentioned in the files. So I think the sooner they just comply with what the public wants, the sooner this could finally become a non-issue.
Let's have a chat, Sabrina, about the visit today from Mohammed bin Salman to President Trump. Reporters questioned the Saudi prince's involvement in the death of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed back in 2018 at the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Let's just take a listen.
As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Well, he is the first Saudi Arabian leader to visit the United States since the incident. The Saudi prince also spoke about Khashoggi, describing it as a mistake.
Painful to hear anyone that been losing his life for no real purpose or nothing. Journalists, it's really painful to hear anyone that been losing his life for no real purpose or not in a legal way, and it's been painful for us in Saudi Arabia. We've did all the right steps of investigation, etc., in Saudi Arabia. And we've improved our system to be sure that nothing happened like that. And it's painful and it's a huge mistake. And we are doing our best that this doesn't happen again.
Well, yes, other conclusions have been drawn. Sabrina, where do you think this leaves the story on the death of Khashoggi?
Well, just to be clear, the U.S. government under the Biden administration in 2021 did release a report in which they concluded that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had approved the order to capture or kill Jamal Khashoggi. So, that has been the official position of the U.S. government. Obviously, the Saudi Crown Prince has been in recent years on this tour in an effort to around the world, an effort to rehabilitate his image and the image of the regime. Trump obviously has always had an affinity for Saudi Arabia. It was the first foreign trip in his first term as president, and he wanted it to be the first trip of his second administration. He just ended up attending Pope Francis's funeral instead. So I do think that Trump has every intention of, having closer relations with the Saudi crown prince, despite what is the position of the U.S. government with respect to the killing of Khashoggi. And in some ways, it was almost inevitable since he has very much since been normalized, by all the, industries, whether it's tech, sports, entertainment, that have resumed normal relations with the Saudis. Trump, I think, has a little bit more strategic interests here where he wants to have normalization between the Saudis and Israel. And that's sort of where we are today.
Do you think both sides will regard this as a successful visit?
I mean, there's obviously a lot of criticism because of the Khashoggi factor, but I think that, one of the other big pieces of news that came out today is that the U.S. is going to sell Saudi Arabia advanced F-35 fighter jets, and that would make Saudi Arabia the first country in the Middle East, other than Israel, to obtain these advanced fighter jets, and that is very much what is regarded as an effort by the Trump administration to maybe move towards some kind of normalization between the Saudis and Israel, which was a key part of their first term agenda, was to have more normalization of ties between various Arab countries and Israel. So I think the administration is overall going to take a step back and just see this meeting as a sign of progress toward their own geopolitical objectives. Obviously, from a human rights standpoint, the criticism is going to remain.
Yeah, and I mean, it looks as if it's still far from the desire of President Trump to get Saudi Arabia involved in the Abraham Accords. That would be a further step down the road, I imagine. Let's, Sabrina, just turn to some comments that Donald Trump has made. He's come under fire for biting back at a reporter when he was taking questions on Air Force One yesterday. Here's the audio. Listen carefully, because it appears that he says to her, "Quiet, piggy."
Sir, if there's nothing incriminating in the file, sir, why not acting as a
quiet, piggy.
Venezuelan, sir?
Well, whether he said it or not, sounded like it. Some people are interpreting that he said "quiet, piggy." What's been the reaction in Washington to this exchange?
Well, there has been criticism from journalists, other members of the White House Correspondents Association, and just journalism organizations here. It's part of a pattern that we've seen where President Trump often attacks reporters personally, and he often talks about women, especially, in ways that are demeaning and inappropriate. And that is he's certainly done. Even if it's not the exact same word, piggy, has certainly demeaned many other female journalists in his first term and now in his second term. So it's part of a familiar pattern, and it's something that unfortunately is becoming a little bit more normal here. But of course, I think the importance of a free press should always be emphasized, and people should not be insulted for asking basic questions.